The Doberman did not bark at Akira Senzaki. She crossed the polished floor, stopped beside his chair, and sat with her eyes fixed on her handler, the exact response Imani Reed had trained her to give when she detected a chemical trace connected to a fire scene. Akira looked down at the dog, then at Imani, and said he had never been inside the warehouse that burned 3 nights earlier. The first lie of the evening, Imani thought might not have come from the person everyone expected. If you're listening from anywhere in the world, tell me where you're listening from in the comments. 10 minutes earlier, Imani had been standing near the service corridor of the Kiyomizu Grand Hotel with a glass of untouched mineral water in one hand and Sable sitting beside her left leg. The ballroom beyond them had been designed to make money look respectable. Shipping executives, insurers, government consultants, and old family names moved beneath suspended lights while a quartet played quietly near the windows. Senzaki Maritime was celebrating a new Yokohama port agreement despite having suffered 3 warehouse losses in less than 6 months. Imani was not there to celebrate. Her black suit had no visible company logo. Sable wore a plain working harness. The hotel credential clipped at Imani's waist said, "Hospitality Contractor." She had already asked twice for it to be corrected. No one had. Masato Kure noticed the badge before he noticed her. He was in his early 50s, silver, beginning at his temples with the careful posture of a man accustomed to sitting beside people whose signatures moved millions. He served as outside counsel to Senzaki Maritime and had personally coordinated several of the insurance communications after the fires. Imani had been hoping to speak with him. Instead, Kure glanced at Sable and told a hotel supervisor, "Keep the dog handler away from the executive tables." The supervisor hesitated. Imani did not correct him. Kure had an open leather portfolio tucked beneath one arm. Inside were settlement summaries, payment authorizations, and a page covered in company names Imani recognized from preliminary claim records. People became careless around those they considered irrelevant. That was information, too. Akira Senzaki entered through the private doors several minutes later. Conversation changed before volume did. Executives straightened. 2 men abandoned a disagreement near the bar. Kure closed his portfolio and moved toward him. Akira was 39, dressed without the decorative excess favored by several men in the room. He listened while walking, accepted no drink, and stopped twice when employees addressed him directly rather than sending an assistant to answer. Imani watched behavior before reputation. It had served her better. Kure spoke to him quietly, gestured toward the ballroom, then toward Imani. Akira's attention passed over her once. "Security," he asked. Hotel contractor Kure replied. "Canine unit." The distinction was useful to Kure. A contractor could be moved. An investigator retained by an insurer could not be handled quite so casually. Akira approached only because Sable remained positioned near the corridor leading to the private meeting rooms. "Move her." Imani looked at him. "She's working. I have a meeting through that door." "So do I." That earned a second look. Kure stepped closer. Ms. Reed. Ms. Reed, whatever inspection the hotel requested, can continue elsewhere." Imani saw the supervisor behind him open his mouth, then stop. Kure believed he was correcting an inconvenience. Akira had accepted Kure's version because from where he stood, there was no reason not to. That was the imbalance. Not shouting, not humiliation. Simply the assumption that her purpose required no verification. Akira gestured toward the corridor. "Clear it." The supervisor reached toward Sable's lead. Imani caught the leash first. "Don't touch the dog." Akira's expression sharpened. "Then, remove her yourself." Sable stood, not aggressively. She turned her head toward Akira as he passed within a few feet, took 2 measured steps toward him, then stopped beside his right side. Her nose moved once near the cuff of his jacket. Then she sat. Imani stopped breathing for half a second. Sable looked directly at her. Akira glanced down. "What is she doing?" Imani set her water aside. "Sable." The dog returned to her immediately. Kure gave a dismissive smile. Apparently, not as disciplined as advertised. Sable's head turned toward him as he adjusted the leather portfolio under his arm. For one brief moment, her nose lifted. Kure moved the case behind his leg. Imani noticed. She said nothing. Instead, she reached inside her jacket and removed a second credential. This one carried the insignia of Reed Risk and Recovery and the authorization code of Hoshino Mutual, the lead insurer on the 3 Senzaki warehouse claims. She handed it to Akira. His eyes moved across the card. Kure's smile disappeared first. Akira read the authorization twice. "You're the investigator, lead investigator." The hotel supervisor stepped backward. Imani pointed toward the hospitality badge at her waist. "I've been asking your event office to correct that since 4:30. Kure answered before Akira could. "An administrative error. An expensive one, potentially." Akira returned the credential. "Explain." Imani looked at his right cuff. Sable is trained in accelerant detection. For the first time, Akira's attention moved to his own clothing. "She alerted on me." "She alerted on your jacket." Kure gave a short laugh. "In a hotel full of cleaning chemicals." She ignores cleaning chemicals. Akira studied Imani rather than the dog now. What did she detect? I won't know, without sampling. And what do you think she detected? Something close enough to the chemical profile from the Shinagawa warehouse fire that she considered it worth telling me. The corridor suddenly had too many listeners. Akira noticed that before anyone else did. He looked at the hotel supervisor. "Close the doors." The supervisor obeyed. Akira did not threaten anyone. He did not ask for Imani's evidence to disappear. He simply extended his arm. "Take the sample." That was not the response she had expected. Imani opened her field kit, swabbed the edge of his cuff, sealed the material, marked the time, and made Akira watch while she initialed the chain of custody strip. Kure said, "This is unnecessary." Imani sealed the evidence bag. "You were prepared to remove me 2 minutes ago because you thought I carried trays. I thought you were disrupting a restricted area. You didn't ask." Kure's face remained polite. Akira's did not defend him. That mattered more than an apology would have. Imani turned to Akira. "Have you been to the Shinagawa property? Since the fire, no before." A pause. "Why? Because residue travels." His answer came carefully. "I oversee more than 40 facilities. I don't inspect burned warehouses personally." It answered something without answering enough. Imani stored the sample. Akira looked toward Sable, then back to her. "What are you actually investigating? The fires, the losses. That isn't the same thing." "No." For the first time that evening, a trace of interest appeared in his face. "Then tell me what matters." Imani considered how much she was authorized to disclose. 3 warehouses. 3 accelerated claims. Emergency Contractors Incorporated shortly before each loss. Akira did not ask who had started the fires. He asked where did the money go. Imani held his gaze. "That's what I'm trying to find out." Behind him, Kure shifted the leather portfolio from one hand to the other. The movement was small enough that no one else seemed to notice. Sable did. Her ears lifted. Hours later, after the gala had emptied, Imani received a preliminary comparison from the private laboratory handling the fire samples. She read it twice before calling anyone. The residue recovered from Akira Senzaki's cuff did not merely belong to the same general class of solvent used at the Shinagawa warehouse. Its composition matched the unusual mixture recovered there closely enough to require formal confirmation. The man whose company stood to lose millions from the fire was physically carrying evidence linked to it. And the moment Imani had mentioned the missing insurance money, Akira had asked the one question a supposedly uninformed CEO should not have known mattered most. By 9 the next morning, Imani had the formal laboratory confirmation. The residue recovered from Akira Senzaki's jacket matched the uncommon solvent blend found in material collected after the Shinagawa warehouse fire. Not a household product, not something likely to transfer from a hotel ballroom. The report did not prove where Akira had encountered it, but it removed the easiest explanation. She sent him the result, without commentary. 7 minutes later, his office requested a meeting. Imani chose the location. Not Senzaki headquarters, not the hotel. A conference room inside Hoshino Mutual's Tokyo offices, where the insurer's access logs would record everyone who entered. Akira arrived with Masato Kure. Imani looked at Kure, once then at Akira. "I asked for you. He is corporate counsel. He is also connected to documents I'm examining." Kure placed his leather portfolio on the table, the same one Sable had noticed at the gala. "Connected how? Sit down." Akira did. Kure remained standing for several seconds before taking the chair beside him. Imani projected 3 insurance claims onto the wall. Different warehouses, different dates, different stated causes. The payout structures, however, repeated the same sequence. Emergency remediation companies appeared immediately after each loss invoiced Senzaki Maritime at rates far above market average, then received transfers from insurer reimbursements. "Who selected these companies?" Akira asked. "Your procurement files say local management. They're lying." Kure turned toward him. "You cannot know that." Akira tapped the first company name. "Because Shinagawa Procurement cannot authorize an emergency contractor above 50 million yen without Tokyo approval." Imani looked at him. That rule had taken her team 2 days to find. Akira had answered in less than 3 seconds. She advanced to the next page. The 3 emergency companies had different directors and different registered addresses. Their incorporation documents had one common point. All had been prepared through a corporate services division controlled by Kure's legal office. Kure studied the screen. "That proves we formed companies." "We form hundreds. 3 companies," Imani said, "created shortly before 3 warehouse losses, all receiving money afterward. Correlation? Yes." She did not overstate it. Kure seemed more irritated by that than he would have been by an accusation. Akira leaned back. "Who instructed your office to form them? I can retrieve the files. You should already know." "No, Akira. I should not personally remember every incorporation handled beneath my name." It was the first time Imani heard anyone at Senzaki speak to him without a title. Akira did not correct him. "Retrieve them." Kure closed the portfolio. "I will." When he left, Imani waited until the conference room door shut. "How long has he worked for you?" 17 years. "That wasn't my question." Akira looked at her. She continued. "How long has he been close enough to speak to you like family?" A pause. "Longer." That answer opened the first door. Akira told her enough to explain why the company's records made no sense, without giving her the whole architecture. Senzaki Maritime was publicly traded, legally audited, and legitimate. Around it existed older relationships, port unions, private security companies, real estate interests, transport brokers, debt collectors, and family-controlled firms that had never operated with the same transparency. Together, they formed what insiders called the Kurohani Circle. Imani had heard the name, not from newspapers, from loss investigators who knew which companies stopped cooperating when certain families appeared in a file. "You're telling me Senzaki is connected to organized crime?" "I'm telling you, the company exists beside an organization that predates most of its directors. That is lawyer language. I'm not a lawyer." "No. You brought one." He accepted the point. Imani shut off the projector. "What is your position in Kurohani?" Akira did not answer immediately. Then he said, "There will be a succession vote this year. And I am expected to win." That changed the scale of the investigation. 3 warehouse fires were no longer simply insurance fraud inside a shipping company. If money was being siphoned through companies tied to Kure, it could be financing a struggle over control of an underworld network large enough to hide financial activity inside legitimate trade. It also changed how Imani looked at Akira. At the gala, his authority had seemed corporate. Now she understood why people had adjusted themselves around him before he ever spoke. "What happens if I put Kurohani in my report?" "You follow your evidence." She almost laughed. "Men in your position usually say that right before explaining what evidence I'm allowed to follow. I'm not asking you to protect me. Not yet. Akira stood. Come with me. No. He stopped. Imani gathered her files. You don't summon your investigator into a car after telling her you may soon control an underworld organization. There is a ledger you need to see. Bring it here. I cannot. Then explain why. That took longer. The ledger includes transactions that cannot leave controlled custody. Illegal sum. At least that answer was efficient. He gave her the address of a private Senzaki records office in Marunouchi and told her she could bring one member of her staff. He also agreed in writing that nothing she viewed there would be excluded from her insurer report solely because it embarrassed Kurohane. It was not trust, but it was a concession he could not easily take back. The records office occupied an unmarked floor above a legitimate Senzaki subsidiary. No guards in theatrical black suits, no visible weapons, just controlled doors, biometric locks, and employees who stopped speaking when Akira entered. Kure was already there. You authorized her, he asked. Yes. This ledger is not subject to insurer review. It is now. Kure looked at Imani. You understand what access like this implies. I understand what records are. I was speaking to him. Akira signed the access register. Kure watched him do it. That signature created a record outside the informal rules of Kurohane. An external investigator now had documented access to material the Succession Council considered internal. Akira had gained transparency for the investigation by creating a political liability for himself. Imani noticed. She also noticed he signed anyway. The ledger gave her the next answer. The insurance money was not moving randomly. Several payments passed through emergency contractors, then into consulting entities that had recently begun lending money to businesses associated with men opposing Akira's succession. Someone was using corporate losses to finance internal resistance. But one transfer created a problem. A junior Senzaki accountant named Daiichi Mori had electronically approved an intermediary payment. Kure seized on it immediately. There. Imani read the approval history. Kure continued. Mori had access. He authorized the release. Remove him, suspend his accounts, notify the insurer. We contain this before it spreads. Akira looked at the screen. For several seconds, Imani thought he might agree. It would be the easy solution. One employee. One signature. One clean explanation. Instead, she opened the automation log. Mori didn't originate the instruction. His approval was triggered by a pre-cleared executive authorization chain. Kure said he still approved it. He approved what the system told him had already been cleared. Akira turned to the records manager. Do not suspend Mori. Kure stared at him. Until we know otherwise, Akira added, he keeps his position. It was the first decision Imani had seen him make that cost him convenience for someone who could give him nothing in return. Her assessment of him changed by 1 degree. Not trust, but the possibility that trust might eventually have evidence behind it. She returned to the authorization chain. The originating code sat 3 levels above Mori. Executive clearance. Imani opened the metadata. The credential was genuine. No cloned account, no external intrusion, no forged certificate. The authorization had been issued from Akira Senzaki's own executive authority. She looked across the table. He had just protected an employee from being blamed for a transaction that ultimately traced back to himself. Akira read the code and said nothing. Kure slowly closed his leather portfolio. For the first time, Imani understood that the question was no longer whether someone inside Senzaki was stealing from Akira. It was why Akira's own authority had helped build the system they were using to do it. By the following afternoon, the story Masato Kure wanted people to believe had already begun circulating inside Senzaki Maritime. Imani Reed had entered a private corporate event under a hospitality credential, obtained access to restricted material, then been granted unusual privileges by Akira Senzaki after spending barely 2 days in his company. None of those statements were completely false. That was what made them useful. Kure did not accuse her of fraud. He sent a procedural memorandum to Senzaki's compliance committee, questioning whether evidence gathered before her investigative status had been formally recognized could survive legal challenge. Copies reached 2 insurers and several members of the Kurohani Succession Council before Imani even saw it. She read the document in Akira's office. He's not trying to prove I did anything wrong. No, he's making everyone afraid of what happens if they trust my findings. Akira signed something without looking away from the memorandum. What are you doing, removing the argument? His corporate secretary entered 10 minutes later with a prepared announcement naming Reed Risk and Recovery, an independent external risk auditor with authority to inspect all records connected to the warehouse losses. Imani read it. This protects access going forward. It doesn't repair the gala credential. It makes the distinction irrelevant. It also makes me publicly your investigator. You already are. That isn't the same thing. Akira understood what she meant. Once his name appeared beside hers in a formal corporate notice, Kure no longer needed to prove improper cooperation. He only needed to make people suspect it. Akira signed anyway. By evening, 2 members of the Kurohani Succession Council withdrew their support for him. One accused him of exposing internal commercial relationships to an outsider. The other refused to explain. Akira received both messages while Imani was still in the room. He deleted neither. You lost votes because of that document. I lost votes because 2 men prefer secrecy to evidence. Still lost them. Yes, she had expected him to dismiss the cost. He did not. That made the decision harder to categorize. The next pressure came from Imani. Her team finished tracing a second group of payments from the emergency contractors. Several were scheduled to clear within 48 hours. If the money moved again, the destination would become much harder to establish. Hoshino Mutual gave her authority to recommend a temporary hold. She used it. For 12 hours, it looked like the correct decision. Then calls began coming from legitimate Senzaki subsidiaries whose emergency reimbursements had been caught inside the same payment structure. A repair contractor in Yokohama could not release wages. A freight company delayed payments to drivers. None of them had anything to do with Kure's network. Imani spent the evening separating genuine claims from suspect ones. Akira came into the conference room after midnight carrying 2 folders. You froze everything. I froze the route, not the companies. The route pays real people. I know. He placed the folders beside her. Lists of employees and contractors affected by the hold. You could have warned me. You could have warned me that your authorization codes were sitting inside fraudulent payment chains. Neither raised their voice. Neither backed away from the point. Imani took the first folder. I'll clear the legitimate payments manually. That will take days. Then I'll stay here for days. Akira watched her begin checking names against invoices. You could lift the freeze and lose the money trail. So people wait. For now. He did not argue again. Instead, he called Senzaki Treasury and arranged short-term internal advances to cover verified payroll obligations while the insurer review continued. That solved the immediate problem. It created another. By morning, someone had leaked that Akira was using discretionary corporate funds to compensate for an outsider's investigative decision. Kurohani Council members who already questioned Imani now had evidence that her choices could force Akira to spend political and financial capital. Their cooperation had become a vulnerability neither could pretend was private. Kure understood it first. He began requesting copies of every authorization Akira issued connected to Reed Risk. He stopped trying to remove Imani. It was more useful to keep her close enough to Akira that every choice between them could be documented. 3 nights later, Akira arrived at her hotel with a security proposal. Not men waiting in the lobby, a written schedule, 2 drivers, rotating personnel, advance route checks, secure access to her office building, no travel without notification. Imani finished reading and placed the pages back on the table. No, Kure knows where your firm works. My address is public. He has access to people who will interpret your investigation as a threat. So give me the intelligence you have. I'll decide what changes I make. I'm not negotiating basic security. You are if it's attached to me. Akira stood near the window. This is not about authority. Then, why does your plan require me to ask permission before changing my route? It requires your team to know where you are. Your team. He did not answer. Imani pushed the document toward him. You grew up in a system where controlling information is how people survive. I understand that. You understand very little about that system. Then tell me more, instead of building a cage around me. It is not a cage. If I can't leave it without someone deciding I'm being irresponsible, the material doesn't matter. That landed harder than the refusal itself. Akira picked up the proposal, for the first time since the investigation began. He looked less like a man defending a strategy than someone confronting a rule he had never been required to question. My father used to say, protection fails once people know they are protected. Imani looked at him. Because then they start making their own decisions. Because predictable behavior keeps people alive. And who decides what behavior is acceptable? He had no answer she would accept. He left without assigning the security detail. The following morning, Imani discovered that he had instead sent her the names of 3 Kurohane-linked companies whose employees should not be permitted inside Reed Risk's offices. Information rather than control. It was a smaller gesture than the protection plan. It earned more trust. That same afternoon, a new report arrived from the 3rd warehouse fire. Imani read the incident timeline twice. Unlike the first 2 warehouses, which had been nearly empty when they burned, the 3rd location had contained a maintenance crew, hours later than scheduled. They had left shortly before the fire spread. Akira was reviewing the report across from her when he reached that section. No one was supposed to be there. Imani stopped turning the page. He kept reading. She did not. Supposed to be. Akira looked up. The warehouse was scheduled to be empty. How did you know that operational planning? You oversee 40 facilities. That was your argument when I asked about Shinagawa? He closed the report. Imani. It was the first time he had used her first name without needing something from her. It almost worked. Almost. She returned to the Marunouchi Records floor that night, using the access authorization Akira himself had given her, not to search Kure's files. Akira's. The executive authorization chain from Chapter 2 had left a trail into a restricted contingency archive. One directory required a second internal credential. Her access should have failed. It did not. Akira's external auditor authorization covered it. He had given her enough power to find what he had chosen not to tell her. The ledger opened. Dates appeared first. Then, inventory movements. Cargo removed from Shinagawa, 48 hours before the fire. Night shifts reassigned, equipment transferred. A second warehouse showed the same pattern, and beside both entries were executive approvals issued before either building burned. Akira's initials appeared on every page. Imani read the 3rd warehouse entry. Its preparations were incomplete. One staffing change had never been executed. That was why people had still been there. No one was supposed to be there. His words returned with a different meaning now. She heard footsteps behind her. Akira stopped when he saw the ledger on the screen. He did not ask how she had found it. Imani stood. How long did you know his eyes moved to the dates? That requires context. No. It requires an answer. He came no closer. I knew someone was using the losses. Before the fires, Imani, she closed the file. You let me investigate evidence you already knew existed. It isn't what you think. You don't know what I think because you decided what I was allowed to know. She removed her access card and placed it beside the keyboard. This time, Akira did not try to stop her. By the time Imani reached the elevator, Kure had sent an emergency notice to the Kurohane Succession Council. The review of Akira Senzaki's authority would begin the next morning. The evidence Akira had hidden to protect his own investigation was now the strongest weapon anyone had against him. By 8 the next morning, the contingency ledger was no longer private. Copies had reached Hoshino Mutual 2 banks, financing Senzaki Maritime, the Kurohani Succession Council, and at least one financial reporter. Attached to it were access records showing Imani Reed entering restricted Senzaki archives, payment freezes initiated by her firm, and Akira's decision to grant her extraordinary authority. Kure had arranged the documents, so they told one clean story. Akira had known the warehouse losses were coming. Imani discovered it. Then he protected her, while she helped contain the evidence. The banks responded first. 2 credit facilities were suspended pending review. Hoshino Mutual froze unresolved claims. The Kurohani Council invoked its emergency succession procedure and temporarily stripped Akira of authority over several internal accounts. By noon, 3 employees at Reed Risk had received legal notices requesting their records. Imani read the 3rd notice in her office. That was when leaving stopped being an option. Whatever Akira had concealed from her, her employees had not chosen any of it. She called Hoshino Mutual and requested preservation orders on every file connected to the Senzaki claims. Then she went back to the contingency ledger, not as Akira's investigator, as the person trying to determine exactly which parts of Kure's accusation were true. The first thing she noticed was timing. The Shinagawa warehouse had been emptied of valuable cargo 48 hours before the fire. The second warehouse showed the same pattern. The third did not. At first, that seemed like confirmation that Akira had staged losses. Then Imani compared the staffing records. Employees had been reassigned from the first 2 locations well before anything happened. No emergency evacuation, no last-minute warning. Their schedules had simply changed. The third warehouse contained a late maintenance crew because one transfer order had never been completed. No one was supposed to be there. Imani stared at the words on the screen. Then she pulled the laboratory file from Chapter 1. Akira's jacket, the residue. He had said he did not inspect burned warehouses personally. That had been technically true. She searched building access records from the weeks before the fires. Akira Senzaki had entered Shinagawa 11 days before it burned. He had entered the second warehouse 9 days before its loss. Not afterward. Before. Imani called him. He answered on the second ring. "Tell me everything now." There was no argument. Akira arrived at Reed Risk 40 minutes later alone. No driver came upstairs. No Kurohani advisor waited outside the door. Imani placed the ledger between them. "You prepared those warehouses." "Yes." "For fires, for loss." "That is not an answer." "I knew someone was using emergency events to move money. I did not know who." "So you created events?" "No." He sat across from her but did not touch the files. "I had already identified 2 facilities that were likely targets. Both were old. Both had weak internal oversight. Both had unusual inquiries about insurance limits before the fires. And instead of reporting that I moved the employees, removed valuable cargo, left the financial structure visible." Imani understood before he finished. "You made bait." "Yes. You expected whoever was stealing from you to attack them. I expected them to create a loss somehow. The distinction did not improve it. You let buildings burn to follow money. I let empty assets remain exposed, and the insurer paid for your experiment." Yes. There was no defense in the answer, only admission. Imani opened the third warehouse record. This one Akira looked at it. "I never prepared it." She waited. That location was not part of my investigation. When the report said a maintenance crew had been present, I knew someone had changed the pattern. Kerr. I suspected him after the second fire. I could not prove it. The entire sequence rearranged itself. Akira's residue had not come from a fire scene after destruction. It had come from a warehouse he had inspected before turning it into bait. His fixation on the money had never been the instinct of a guilty owner trying to hide arson. Following the money had been the purpose from the beginning. The empty buildings had not been fortunate timing. And his words at the third report, "No one was supposed to be there," had not been casual operational knowledge. They were the reaction of a man realizing someone else had taken control of his trap. Imani closed the ledger. "You knew my investigation would make him move." "Yes. And you let me walk into it without telling me." Akira looked at her directly. "Yes." That answer hurt more than an excuse would have. "Why?" "Because if you knew what I'd done, you might change how you investigated." "You mean I might have made a choice you couldn't control?" He did not contradict her. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Imani reached for another file. "Kurei's portfolio." Akira looked at her. Sable reacted to it at the gala. "You never told me. I didn't know whether it mattered." "It does now." She pulled Sable's original detection log and the hotel access records. Kurei's leather portfolio had been carried through a private service entrance used by executives arriving from Senzaki offices. That same portfolio appeared on security footage at the Marunouchi Records floor 2 days before the gala. Imani requested archived canine comparison samples held by her lab. Residue collected from the portfolio's exterior during a later evidence sweep matched the same uncommon solvent family. Not enough to prove Kurei started a fire. Enough to prove his claim that he had only handled paperwork was false. Then, the financial side locked into place. The emergency companies created through his legal office had received diverted insurance money. Their consulting payments fed businesses, supporting council members opposing Akira's succession. The third warehouse, unlike the first two, had been paired with transactions Akira had never approved. Kurei had not created Akira's trap. He had discovered it. Then, he had used Akira's own authorization system to turn that trap into a weapon. Imani sent the complete evidentiary package to Hoshino Mutual external auditors and the bank compliance teams before Kurohane could contain it internally. Kurei responded within an hour. He called the Succession Council into emergency session and demanded that Akira invoke internal privilege to block disclosure. Akira went. Imani did not accompany him. Her part was evidence. His part was deciding what power was still worth keeping. The council gave him a choice. Kurohane could seal internal books, challenge the insurer, remove Kurei privately, and preserve the organization. Akira would likely keep enough votes to survive. Or he could authorize full external disclosure of Kurohane-linked financial structures. That would expose Kurei's shell companies before he could move the remaining money. It would also expose decades of arrangements the circle depended on to remain invisible. Akira signed the disclosure. Within hours, banks froze the shell entities. External auditors took custody of transaction records. Kur lost access to the accounts that made his strategy possible. The Succession Council could no longer protect him without implicating itself. The threat did not end with a gunshot. It ended because the system Kurei intended to inherit could no longer hide him. When Akira returned to Reed Risk that night, he no longer had a succession to win. Imani was standing beside Sable, reading the first confirmation that Kurei's funds had been locked. Akira placed his council credentials on her desk. She looked at them, then at him. "You destroyed it." "No." He looked at the authorization badge that had once opened every Kurohane door for him. "I stopped protecting it." Kurei had lost. Akira had paid for that victory, with the empire he had spent his life preparing to control. And Imani still had not decided whether the man who finally surrendered that control had surrendered enough for her to trust him. 3 weeks after the disclosure, Kurohane no longer existed in the form Akira had been raised to inherit. The name still appeared in old contracts, archived ownership records, and the private conversations of men who had once built careers around it. But the structure itself had been broken open. Legitimate logistics companies were separated from private security firms. Accounts that had operated through informal family authority were placed under external review. Several board members resigned rather than answer questions they had avoided for years. Masato Kure did not disappear. That would have been too simple. His legal authority was suspended while financial investigators reconstructed the shell company network he had used to redirect insurance money. The same paper trail he had relied on to make Akira look guilty now prevented him from arguing that he had merely followed instructions. He had always believed documentation belonged to whoever controlled the story around it. Imani had proved otherwise. Daiichi Mori kept his job. The junior accountant returned to work under a new compliance structure with his name formally cleared from the investigation. Imani saw the notice because he sent Reed Risk a brief message thanking her for refusing to accept the first convenient explanation. She saved it, not because she needed gratitude, because that decision had cost her something too. Hoshino Mutual terminated Reed Risk's primary investigative contract at the end of the month. The official language was careful. Her findings were not questioned. Her evidence remained admissible. Her conduct was not characterized as fraudulent, but once her personal relationship with Akira became part of the record, the insurer concluded that future work involving Senzaki-linked companies would create an unacceptable appearance of conflict. It had been the largest account her firm had ever held. Losing it meant canceling an expansion into Osaka and delaying 2 hires she had already approved. When she told Akira, he asked one question. "How much did you lose?" Imani looked at him across the conference table. "Enough that I'm not telling you. I could replace the contract. That is exactly why I'm not telling you." He understood. 6 months earlier, he would have solved the problem before she finished refusing the offer. Now he nodded once. "Then I won't." That restraint was more useful to her than money. Akira's own losses were harder to hide. The Kurohani succession vote was dissolved permanently. His voting control inside Senzaki Maritime was reduced through the restructuring, and several family-held entities were sold to satisfy regulatory and banking requirements. The corner office remained his only, because the legitimate board still wanted him running the shipping company. Everything surrounding the office changed. Fewer drivers waited downstairs. Fewer calls were answered before he made them. People who once asked for permission now asked for contracts. Imani watched him adapt to that without pretending it did not cost him. One afternoon, she entered his office and found the old Kurohani council seal inside an open desk drawer. He had not thrown it away. He had not displayed it either. "What are you going to do with that?" she asked. "I don't know. That's new." He looked at her. "What is not already deciding?" A faint smile appeared brief enough that she almost missed it. Their relationship still had no agreed name. That was deliberate. The crisis had forced them to stand beside each other because the same structure was trying to destroy them both. Now there was no emergency, no frozen account, no council hearing, no reason they had to remain close. That mattered more than anything they had done while under pressure. 2 days later, Akira came to Reed Risk carrying a thin folder. Sable lifted her head from beneath Imani's desk, recognized him, and lowered it again. Akira placed the folder in front of her. "What is this, your release?" Imani opened it. The first document terminated every confidentiality obligation Reed Risk had entered through Kurohani, rather than through ordinary corporate contract. The second canceled all informal security directives connected to her name office staff vehicles and travel. The third relinquished any right Senzaki-linked entities might claim to restrict future investigations conducted by her firm. She looked up. "You had people tracking my travel." "Not tracking." Imani waited. Akira reconsidered the word. "Yes. When Afterkure started collecting information on your office, you said you wouldn't assign the security detail. I didn't. You created something else." "I did." She closed the folder. For several seconds, the old argument sat between them again. Protection, control, permission. Akira did not try to reframe it. "I should have told you." Yes, I thought removing the visible security solved the disagreement. It solved what you could see. Yes. He placed a final page on the desk. It was already signed. No clause requiring her to stay connected to Senzaki Maritime. No private settlement, no protection agreement hidden inside legal language, nothing linking her future to his. If you leave Tokyo, he said, no one follows. And if I stay, no one follows. Your people. They are not my people anymore. There was no self-pity in the sentence. That made it heavier. Imani studied the signature. For months, Akira had treated information as something he distributed according to risk. He had treated safety the same way. Now he was giving up the leverage that could make her presence anything less than voluntary. You understand what this means, she asked. That you can walk away. And you're giving it to me anyway. Yes. She slid the papers back toward him. For the first time he looked uncertain. Imani tapped the signature line. These stay. He nodded. So do I. Akira did not reach for her immediately. That mattered too. She came around the desk and stopped close enough that neither of them could pretend the choice was professional. You don't get to decide what I need to know anymore. I know. You don't get to protect me from decisions that belong to me. I know, and if I ask for distance, I give it. Only then did she take his hand. Months later, Reed Risk occupied the same office. Sable still slept beneath Imani's desk. Akira now ran a smaller logistics company from Yokohama, audited aggressively, and admired by almost nobody who had respected Kurohani. One rainy morning, he arrived carrying an unopened envelope containing the final sale documents for an old Kurohani property. He placed it between them. The old Akira would have opened it first. This one looked at Imani. Together, she pulled her chair closer. Power had once taught him how to keep people near. Trust taught him how to let them choose. Subscribe, and tell me in the comments where you're listening from and what you think really changed them.